Thank you.
Perfect. So, Tansé Dinishna Kashun Colette Trudeau. Hello, everyone. My name is Colette Trudeau, and I am honored to serve as the Chief Executive Officer for Métis Nation British Columbia. I'd like to start by thanking the committee for the opportunity to present Métis Nation British Columbia's 2024 budget submission. I'd also like to acknowledge the Finance Committee's clear recommendations to support last year's budget submission. In the report on the budget 2023 consultation, the committee made the unevocable recommendation to provide funding to Métis Nation BC for governance and to ensure the Métis culture is recognized. So we trust you'll value the strategic direction our nation is taking on our updated request in the broader context of reconciliation. We recognize the ongoing need for more education about our nation. Métis Nation British Columbia is the government of Métis in BC. We are part of the Métis National Council and represent more than 24,000 registered Métis citizens and advocate for approximately 98,000 self-identified Métis people in the province. Our mission is to improve the quality of life of Métis in BC by developing culturally distinct programs and services. The province has recognized that Métis people in BC have certain Aboriginal rights as one of the distinct Indigenous peoples in Canada under Section 35 of the Constitution. In addition to our unique language, Michif, we have made cultural, historical, and contemporary contributions to the creation of the province. It's imperative that British Columbia take a distinctions-based approach to working with MNBC to ensure an understanding of how our nation defines DRIPA within the rights of our citizens. We want to be a good partner to the province in reconciliation, but the lack of core capacity is holding us back. Our total request for this budget submission is the mere amount of $104 million that includes governance, strategic programming, and reconciliation engagement. So to speak briefly to Métis governance, MNBC has a citizen mandate to both form government and pursue self-governance. So we are seeking funding for the fiscal year of 2024-25 to ensure sufficient resources for the operation of MNBC broadly and our board of directors and chartered communities. Core governance activities requiring funding include our Métis Nation Governing Assembly, our AGM, our MNBC Senate, which is our judicial arm, Métis Women BC, which is our Women's Committee, Youth Committee, and our Veterans BC Committee. Unfortunately, our 39 Métis chartered communities throughout the province are volunteer-based, so the funding that they do receive is not predictable or sustainable in this era of reconciliation. We are set up very similar to the provincial government. Therefore, we have various ministries that emulate the provincial ministries. And therefore, our work really does parallel quite nicely with all of the work that the province is doing. Our request is for $5.23 million to support the critical governance activities, which reflects our continued growth. Through cultural protection and strategic programming, we have various areas that are of key importance to our Métis culture. And just to highlight a few, we did sign a critical document in 2018 that was around pursuing jurisdiction for Métis children and families. And so this is a key area that we want to continue to pursue as we have over 750 kids, Métis kids in the child welfare system. Another key area where we are seeking funding is around K-12. Our Métis students do not receive sufficient support, and as the Métis government, we receive $50,000 a year to support K-12 and advocacy across all of our school districts. Another key consideration is around housing and homelessness. The federal government provided MNBC with funding to support land purchases, but we really do need to receive additional support to develop the properties. A lot of our key priorities really do align with the province and your key priorities. Around reconciliation and MNBC of government approach to Métis relations as a partnership that respects and furthers Métis self-determination. And again, as a good partner in reconciliation, MNBC receives frequent requests from the province to engage in the development of distinctions-based legislation. And so we are seeking funding in the amount of $17 million to continue to do that good work. So in conclusion, thank you again for the opportunity to present MNBC's budget 2024, and I'd love to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Colette, for your presentation that's there. I'd like to ask the question, can you provide us with some examples of the types of programs and services that MNBC runs for its citizens and where there may be gaps between the federal and provincial funding for those types of programs? Absolutely.
So in general, MNBC receives the vast majority of our funding from the federal government. We have seen an uptick through the signing of our letter of intent with the province, which has really worked on moving towards a reconciliation agreement. But really, in terms of federal funding in comparison to provincial funding, there is a major imbalance. And so quite a huge proportion of our programs are primarily federally funded. Just last year, we have seen an increase in the relationship with ACE, but we actually ran out of funding to support Métis students, post-secondary, short tickets, long tickets, and we were able to support about over 2,800 Métis people with education, but there were still a number of them that were on a wait list. And so other key areas that we're focusing on, and again, there is that discrepancy. It goes back to getting Métis people into homes. And so we are just about to launch our first-time homebuyers program for citizens. We have an initial investment of $1 million over 5 years from the federal government, but this simply isn't enough. We know that there are so many Métis people, and again, I say 98,000 self-identified and 24,000 citizens, and we're wanting to help them get into homes. And we've done a number of social infrastructure engagements that have really demonstrated the importance of creating Métis community hubs. And so being able to access distinction-based funding for housing is really critical to us. In addition, with the increased cost in food, we do have our food program, which is helping Métis citizens with the rising cost of groceries. But we've again been using federal funding to really do some of these more specific programs that support key gaps that our citizens have identified. So I would say that there's really great programs that are happening across MNBC, and that partnership between the province and MNBC could really help ensure that we're supporting all of our citizens in a really good way.
Thank you. Henry.
Thank you. I think I asked the exact same question. I do apologize. I'm a bit troubled by the idea of funding, because obviously Métis Nation, you're here to having a government-to-government conversation. We should be talking more about revenue sharing instead of funding the government, I should say it this way. Of course, unlike Indigenous communities on the First Nation, there's no land title. That's really allowed us to actually define the revenue sharing. So if you don't mind me to take a step back from your booklet, sure. Is there any kind of planning strategy talking about how can we have a future conversation around really more of a government-to-government talk and about the revenue sharing in a way that you think might work for Métis Nation BC?
Yeah, so we have started on that process. So we are working with the Ministry of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation to start down a path of a new fiscal framework. And so we're very much on the front end of it. We're creating a policy paper to really see what that looks like. And so we see an opportunity through a new fiscal framework to ensure that, we recognize that whole of government approach and that government to government approach where there's an opportunity for MNBC to function as a government and to identify the gaps and be able to fund areas that we truly need to fund rather than just one-off different programs that are very prescriptive. And so we see this as a key opportunity to really truly meet the needs of our citizens, and again are at the front end. But we know this province, the province is in a position where they want to advance reconciliation, and this is a key way to support us on our path to true recognition as the Métis government for Métis and BC.
Tom.
Thanks for the presentation. Just going through the requests here and stopping on recommendation number 3 on reconciliation engagement. And there's a need here for capacity building. And as the MNBC form of government is somewhat similar to what the provincial government is with ministries and what part of capacity, which ministry do you find that needs the most capacity understanding? There's like provincial government, there's some that might be okay, but some ministries need a lot of capacity.
Yeah, and I would say our Ministry of Women and Gender Equity is incredibly underfunded. It's an area where I know there's been a lot of work around missing and murdered Indigenous women, gender-based violence. There's a lot of work being done in that area, but there's simply not enough resources that are going, quite frankly, from federal to provincial that ends up being able to support grassroots women and communities and actually doing the work that needs to be done. And so that is a key ministry that I would say is underfunded.
Susie and then Ray.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and thank you for the work that you do in advocating and representing. It's wonderful. You're speaking about lack of core capacity funding for the 39 Métis chartered communities. Tell me a little bit more about what a chartered community is and what that core funding would look like. And if you can, give me a dollar amount.
Absolutely. And so, and thank you for asking that question, because this is a key part of education that we need to do. So Métis Nation BC, our governance structure doesn't exist without our chartered communities. They are our community. And not to get long-winded, but our communities are the reason so many Métis people are being able to reclaim and revitalize our culture. And so our communities are set up. They are set up as nonprofit societies. They have boards, a board of directors that lead, quite frankly, the day-to-day operations and are looked to run events, do all the administration, submit books, do all of that work with no staff capacity. And MNBC has done everything in our ability to support them, because without them, we don't exist. And so really, our communities are seeking the opportunity at this point to be able to have an office for people to come in, get support, and have someone be staffed to be there, and continue to grow, put in proposals so they can continue to do that work. And I know for many of them, the ability to, and so we are split up into 7 regions, and we have communities all throughout, and have various members from, having about 100 Métis citizens to, 4,000 citizens or more. But so their needs vary, and they're all in different places, but again, really truly make up our structure. And so in terms of that capacity, I mean, if they were sitting here, they would say, well, probably the full amount that we asked for would be sufficient. But from my standpoint, being able to give them, if we were able to put a dollar figure of baseline $50 million a year, and that really is, we're looking at maybe 1.5 per community to really do the work that they need to do, make sure that they have the staff in place, continue to do that cultural revitalization work that they need to do. Right now, we're looking at what can we take off of our administration, what programs can we third-party administer, because our agreements are not always as flexible so that we can actually provide funding to our communities to then deliver those programs. And so we're really looking for every mechanism, but we truly want to advocate so they can stand on their own and do the work that they need to do in community, rather than everything being required to be volunteer-driven. No other nonprofit, really has 39 different nonprofits connected to them that ask them to work strictly as volunteers.
And Ronna Ray, you have the final question, because we're nearing the final end of our 5 minutes.
Okay. All right. You say the vast majority of your funding so far is from federal government, and you're asking for just over $100 million. What is it that you get from the federal government on an annual basis?
Yeah, so our annual budget federally is over $80 million that we receive, and it's a plus or minus, but around $80 million. And again, those are all program, service, primary So we have very specific prescribed pieces that we have to cover. That also includes our housing and homelessness and getting Métis childcare centres in place. So there's a lot of infrastructure dollars that we have that the federal government has provided. We generally haven't operated at that level, but with the focus on housing and childcare, we have seen an increase in our annual budget.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll call it. Thank you very much for your time and your presentation this afternoon.
Thank you so much, everyone.